Good morning, and thank you for tuning in. This is an addendum to Wednesday's Chatham House weekly COVID-19 pandemic briefing on the topic of pharmaceutical industry perspective. Our guest this week is Thomas Cueni, Director General of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, the IFPMA, who is joining us to discuss what's going on with the development and access to tests, drugs, vaccines, and other pharmaceutical products for the coronavirus. We unfortunately had some technical issues on Wednesday when Thomas dropped out of the conversation intermittently. So he very kindly agreed to return today to finish up some of the questions that we either rushed through or didn't have a chance to get to. So thank you, Thomas, for coming back.
Thank you, Emma.
We will dive right in. I want to get back to something we were discussing on Wednesday, right when we had the technical issues, which was on the R&D question on the timing of vaccines. And I had asked you about how realistic you thought it was to have vaccine by Christmas, and governments are starting to prioritize who they're giving it to before Christmas, and whether all this talk is realistic or justified or hype, and what are the reasonable expectations. You had said that we would be lucky to have any vaccine at scale by next summer. So I just wanted to go back to that as to what do you think is realistic for the timing of vaccine doses at scale and what it really takes to get that.
Very complex question, and I don't believe that anybody can give you an absolutely firm answer to that. We may have a vaccine approved by Christmas. It's unlikely that we will have huge doses available by Christmas. And one of the reasons is that there's so many unknowns, there's so many variables in terms of the testing. We do have encouraging results from early clinical tests, but we do not know yet how it works when you expand the tests to large populations. Therefore, the realistic assumption is we may have vaccines at scale available next spring or summer, maybe some earlier, but we need, I think, a lot of luck to get that far.
And what exactly does it take? Does that mean by summer, everybody who needs it will be able to get a vaccine, or only 10% of those who need it, and then it'll roll out over a year? What does it actually take to get it into the hands of the people who need it, once we've got a approved vaccine?
When you look at the number of doses needed, the world has a population of 8 billion. And it's estimated in order to create immunity, you would need to vaccinate about 80% of these. By now, most people expect that you will need at least 2 doses to create the immunity you want, which means we are talking about the magnitude of 15 billion, up to 15 billion. The dose numbers available we talk about is more in the order of 2 billion plus next year. Therefore, it's absolutely crystal clear that there will need to be decisions on who gets it first and how are the allocations made.
And then to get to the herd immunity numbers figure, what are we talking about then? Another year before everyone else, the non-priorities, get it?
It depends on which of the vaccines work, how many vaccines we have. I think we all keep our fingers crossed that we will not have one vaccine, that we may have 4 to 5, 7 or 8 would be even better. Some of the technology platforms allow scaling up easier and faster, more flexible, but on the other hand, those are the technologies where no vaccine has been approved yet, where no at-scale manufacture has been done yet, and you have a lot of technical issues also in terms of manufacturing, such as, for example, the glass vials you need. To give you just one, example, normally, traditionally, you have 1 vaccine dose per glass vial. That's what you are used when you get your flu shot. Here, because everybody knows that we will not have enough specialized glass vials, we are talking about 20 doses per vial so that you can rationalize the glass. Now, how this will work out and which vaccine work, we, I think, have reason to be optimistic that the vaccine approaches which are pursued do work, but for example, if it doesn't, we may not have a vaccine next year.
And do you agree with David? On Wednesday, he had said that production capacity is going to be the major bottleneck. Do you agree with David that that is going to be the sticking point?
I fully agree with him, and there's no way that you can escape some of the bottlenecks which exist there. To give you another example, the highest dose, vaccine dose, which has been produced historically was 250 million. And now we talk about 5 to 10 billion. All the experts I talk to agree there's no way that you can get this fixed within 1 year. You will need more than 1 year to reach these targets. And of course, the other question also is, you may run into problems because not everybody may want to get the vaccine.
Sure. And do we really know how many people will need the vaccine?
In terms of need, I think and that's reason for more optimism. When I look at the discussions we have in Geneva, for example, with CEPI, Gavi, and WHO, pretty much everybody agrees that you need to provide the vaccines to the frontline healthcare workers first. That is a much smaller number. Worldwide, it's about 1% of the global population. When you look at the elderly, you get a higher number. It's about 8% of the global population above 65. In Japan, it's more than 25%. Therefore, you different countries, different needs. And then you also look at people with pre-existing morbidities, such as diabetes, hypertension, the vulnerable population. That's why the discussions, for example, in terms of global allocation plans is that one hopes and aims to provide vaccines for 20% of the population in the first step.
And that would cover those groups? That
would cover those groups.
Okay, great. I think that's it on that question. Well, actually, one more thing. You said it's impossible to get past some of these bottlenecks. Is it not possible to, now that we know that those are going to be bottlenecks, is there anything we can do, such as repurpose some factories, or just like we do to expand capacity with the hospital beds? Can we not, with a bit of foresight, just chuck up more capacity now so that we don't have a bottleneck?
Emma, we do not talk about repurposing a few thousands or a few 10,000 hospital beds. We are talking about setting up new vaccine manufacturing plants, which normally takes 5 years to get a new plant. Here we talk about getting this fixed within months. And global vaccine capacity has been estimated at 5 billion right now, but that is for polio, for measles, for yellow fever, for flu, for whatever. And here we talk about the need of maybe up to 15 billion. And by the way, something which I think has been ignored to some extent is we will know whether the vaccine is safe. We will have some data about the efficacy, but we do not know how long will it last. It may be that the immunity lasts for a year, maybe for 6 months, maybe for 2 years. That would mean if you would need to vaccinate again, like a seasonal flu shot. And of course, you can imagine what's that impact on capacity needs.
Thank you. I want to move on to the access question. And one thing that we didn't quite get to the bottom of on Wednesday, and that is the issue of poorer countries, low and middle income countries that may not be able to buy the vaccine or get enough doses through the COVAX facility, positioning themselves at the moment to pave the way so that they could invoke what's called compulsory licenses, which is when they allow generics manufacturers in their countries to start copying, making generic versions of vaccines without the permission of big pharma patent holders. and that they might be allowed to do that. Is the industry worried about those maneuvers going on right now and talk of that happening?
We are concerned about any talk which undermines intellectual property, because at the end of the day, the ability to respond so fast, so quickly to COVID-19 with therapeutics, with vaccine development too, is a reflection of our business model of the competitive research, which is rewarded through IP, strong IP, and the successful research therefore is protected. Now, talk about compulsory licensing in vaccines shows a bit of an ignorance about the nature and the challenges of vaccine manufacturing. To the best of my knowledge, and we have done quite a bit of research, there hasn't been a compulsory license on a vaccine in the past, which means historically, and we really were digging deep. Simple reason is it is much more about know-how. You cannot steal that. It is about the quality assurance. It is about skilled workers on the finishing lines, on the manufacturing lines. To give you one example of the complexity of vaccines, per one person in a therapeutic plant looking after quality assurance, in a vaccine plant, you have 50%. Therefore, the importance of quality assurance, and the reason is fairly straightforward, because a medicine you apply on a sick person, potentially fighting for his or her life, and therefore you're willing to accept risks in the balance for benefit versus risk. A vaccine is used on healthy populations, therefore you can't run any risk. You don't want to cut corners. And this is a knowledge which is built up over decades. And that's why the compulsory licensing issue is talked about in the vaccines. It's much more relevant in the treatment area, but in vaccines it hasn't been done, and honestly it wouldn't work.
What's the danger that they might invoke it for drugs? I agree, obviously it's more useful with drugs, and it has been used for HIV drugs, and they can just reverse engineer the drug, can't they? They can just make it, they don't need the technology transfer. So is it a danger for COVID drugs?
For drugs, it has been used in the past, and of course we are concerned, but because the industry's business model, our innovation system, depends on IP, I'm honestly not that much worried about it. And one reason is the industry, and Jeremy Farrar said that last week, I think is pretty much doing right now what everyone would hope the industry to do, which means working 24/7, scaling up manufacturing capacity, reaching out for voluntary licenses, establishing large networks. When you look at drugs, there's also a difference between chemical molecules. Small chemical molecules are generally easier to copy. They're generally easier to reverse engineer. When it comes to biologics, it is challenging. And also with chemical molecules, it depends on the complexity of production. I've heard somebody say, even if one would try to impose a compulsory license, you would take 18 months before you have the first shipment. That does not really help, because I think all of us hope that within 18 months we can travel again. We do have some vaccines. We hopefully also have more progress and treatments.
And when you say voluntary licensing, you'd said on Wednesday that the industry has already started reaching out for voluntary license to partners for voluntary licensing agreements. Can you explain what's the difference between a compulsory license and a voluntary license, and what talks are going on? I mean, how obviously with voluntary licensing, it depends how many countries are covered and what exactly it is, as to the depth of that commitment. What exactly is going on at the moment with that?
A compulsory license would normally be for a country, which means single country imposes a compulsory license. And if then the manufacturer would export it to another country where you have a patent, you could sue as a manufacturer for infringement. That's why generally a voluntary licensing approach, I think, is the far preferred approach for governments as well as for manufacturers, because it's based on a company picking their partners, trusting that they can do and provide and manufacture with the same quality, offering them technology assistance and technology transfer. That's what we have seen, and there are two models of that. One is companies do it bilaterally, and we have seen this, for example, with remdesivir, or the other example, which has been used widely on HIV/AIDS drugs, is through the Medicines Patent Pool. Medicines Patent Pool is a platform which has been established in Geneva, especially for HIV/AIDS, for malaria, and for TB, widely used in HIV/AIDS, but again, it's based on voluntary. And the board of the Medicines Patent Pool has decided during the duration of the pandemic to expand its scope so that all COVID-19 therapies would be covered. And that's something which we from the industry, we endorse a voluntary approach. And the third element, of course, is I see companies really scaling up their own production capacity.
So does that mean that any country through the Medicines Patent Pool would be allowed to make COVID drugs under license, or excuse my ignorance of how the mechanics of how that works?
It's a good question. It depends on the contract. It depends on the contract, because the contract between the MPP and the company will cover what's the geographic scope, which countries are covered, which are not.
And do we know what that's going to be for COVID? Has that been sorted out yet? Is there anything you can tell us?
Actually, there are examples which have already been done and they're widely communicated, and some of them went way beyond traditional MPP countries. It's like when you look at, for example, the Global Vaccines Alliance, Gavi, they normally are there for 73 countries, and it's really 73 low and middle income countries. It's the poorer countries. When you look, for example, what we discuss right now within this COVAX facility, which is the collaboration of CEPI, Gavi, and WHO, for vaccines development, the scope is much broader. And actually one of the objectives of Gavi is really to go beyond their traditional 73. Actually, they do need high-income countries paying in to Gavi, because they need cross-subsidization for the poorer countries.
Okay, great. My last question before I go on to audience questions is about pricing. We did get to this on Wednesday, but we didn't quite finish this. And what I was asking is, does the industry have a policy on pricing of how much they're going to charge? So separate to going through the COVAX facility. So for the other, outside of that, have they decided, are there any discussions? I guess yesterday we had the news of the first price that had been stated for the AstraZeneca vaccine, the deal they did with the US for $40 per person, kind of setting a benchmark for that. But obviously that's going to be too expensive for a lot of low and middle income countries. But what can you tell us about what the intention of the industry is on pricing, as pricing is a major pillar of access?
I need to correct you, Emma. It wasn't the first one.
Please do.
2 days before, you had the US signing a contract with Pfizer-BioNTech for 100 million doses. Pfizer,
not AstraZeneca.
Yeah, AstraZeneca was yesterday also with the US, and AstraZeneca had different deals or not. Therefore, you will, from an industry point of view, there, I have to admit, I'm somewhat restrained. If we would discuss pricing approaches collectively, you know, I, as DG of the Global Industry Association, my legal counsel would get a heart attack and I might end up in jail. There are really strict limits under which we can have discussions. What we can is policy approaches. When you look at the industry commitment, and we had many CEOs from companies joining us in global media briefings, all of them are committed to the notions of equitable, available, affordable. Now, when you look at affordable, on the one hand, affordable is in the eye of the beholder. Therefore, there may be different views from different people. On the other hand, affordable is different in Sudan, for example, versus the US, or even in Switzerland versus Bulgaria. Therefore, I personally believe that we will see different approaches. And in order to make the vaccines or treatments available, it is absolutely crucial that you do get some tiered pricing.
Sure.
Where in some countries, the poor people, they can't afford even 50 cents. Therefore, they will rely on...
Has the industry committed to COVID products at no profit overall? I understand the tiered pricing and the rich countries subsidizing the poor, but overall, has the industry or any companies committed that they'll do this at no profit, no kind of break even?
Some companies did commit at no profit. Again, collectively as industry, we couldn't. We simply could not. Right. However, pretty much every company committed to the notion of affordable. Pretty much every company committed to socially responsible. And it also, the price will depend, for example, on some companies, they went for risk-sharing agreements where the US government co-paid for the development cost, where some governments share the risk of building up huge manufacturing capacities at a time when you have no clue whether your vaccine will ever reach the market. Other companies said, we don't want to have money from the governments. It will depend on the technology you use. Therefore, we will see differences. We will also see differences because some vaccines will be 50% efficacious. That's, by the way, the target of the FDA. Others hopefully will show 80% efficacy. We may see differences, but across the board, I would expect at least the companies which I represent within IFPMA, which are the big multinational corporations, they all committed to the notion of affordability.
Okay, great. I'm going to go to a few audience questions. I'm going to start with a question from Charles Clift. Many governments like the UK are already making bilateral deals with different vaccine producers in the hope that one or more will be successful. What does this mean for the success of the COVAX facility?
It is a challenge. And let's face it, it is challenging because there's a race from governments to buy up capacity, to sign deals left and right. And with all the rhetoric which we have heard, that the call to action from global leaders, the same global leaders, and it's not just the US, they do sign bilateral deals big way. Having said that, and we need to be realistic, no government, whether it's Boris Johnson or Emmanuel Macron or Chancellor Merkel, can ignore what their own citizens want as fast as possible access to vaccine. Having said that, I do sense a strong feeling we cannot afford to go back to what we had when we had the swine flu, H1N1, where the rich countries bought up all the vaccines, all the antivirals, and the poor ones were left shouting and screaming. We have learned from that, for example, in terms of the pandemic flu preparation. We have an agreement between vaccine manufacturers and WHO for stockpiling to put some capacity to WHO. And COVAX does this now on a much larger scale. When you look at the COVAX ambition, they try to have 1 to 2 billion doses available next year. And they really that is based on an allocation system where WHO, and I already mentioned it, agreed you want to vaccinate the healthcare workers first, you want to treat the vulnerable, and I think I'm cautiously optimistic it will work, but the crunch of it is, in order to do that and to deliver, CEPI and Gavi will need money from the richer countries so that you can get the doses to the poor countries.
Sure. Okay, this is a question from Mita Dulipala, and She says, it has become clear that public-private partnerships have been exalted during the pandemic. How much of a step change do you think this will have on collaboration models adopted by the industry?
I've seen movements in the past. The industry 20 years ago would have said nothing but the industry's business model works. We have realized, for example, in the collaboration with the Global Fund, in the collaboration on neglected tropical disease, that there are areas where public-private partnership are really the way forward. And I would expect that post-pandemic, we will have a day of reckoning where we will sit down. I strongly believe that the industry's business model for most of the medical challenges is the best one to work. But in terms of pandemic preparedness, all of us have to admit that one could have done better. In terms of investments in antiviral research, in terms of investing in, for example, an ever-warm vaccine plant. And I do agree with Jeremy Farrar, who said that one really needs to look, how are we better prepared? And one of the elements, and there I'm pretty assertive, historically the industry was left outside the door when you had these discussions, the dignity discussions on pandemic preparedness. There's not a single...
We went over that last time.
Yeah.
So I don't want to, just to squeeze in one more question. Sorry to cut you off there, but we've gone over already, but this is from Dina Mufti, and this is one that was asked on Wednesday while you weren't around, so I'd love to get back to it. Are bronchodilators and steroid inhalers showing to be effective as a treatment?
I don't know.
Okay, great. Well, then I can squeeze in one more. And that is, can you talk about any issues that have hampered efforts to repurpose medicines for COVID-19 or to get candidate drugs through the necessary clinical trials? And that's from Ian Sample at The Guardian.
I try to think about it, but by and large, we have seen an unprecedented collaboration. And I've never heard so much praise from industry leaders, for example, for regulatory agencies, because normally there's tension because you feel that they try to hold you back to delay. But whether it's the FDA, whether it's EMA, whether it's ICMRA, that's the coalition of the leading medicines regulatory agencies, whether it's WHO, everybody is keen to work together. But one element I think is crucial, and that's where the industry is firm. You really need to do proper clinical trials. You need to await the results. And one of, in my view, shortcomings I've seen over the last few months, the rush to publication. And it's not the headlines in the daily newspapers. It's even publication in the leading journals such as Lancet. And then, oh my God, within 2 or 3 weeks, you have to retract. I think that is not good. And one really needs to do one step after the other and to wait until you have proper evaluation of the results.
Well, that gives us a very good segue into next week's discussion, which will be with Richard Horton, the editor of The Lancet. So thank you for that segue. We have run out of time again, but I think we got through quite a few of the remaining questions. And thank you so much for returning to do the makeup session. So
I'm glad
value
we
out
didn't have any technical hitch this time. I miss the audience. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's it then. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.